Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. I will assure the Minister that not my entire hour of questions will be about the Prince Rupert gas transmission line, but I will start off with an easy one so I can decide where to go from here. Would the Minister be able to tell me who is the statutory decision maker on the substantial start decision for PRGT?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. The question was asked earlier, and so the legislation does determine that I am the statutory decision maker, and it's at my discretion if I choose to delegate.
Member.
Thank you, and apologies for the repeat question. Next time I'll be here earlier. Can the Minister tell me how does the government intend on addressing nations who have rejected or no longer want to be bound by impact benefit agreements with the province regarding PRGT? What is the planned approach with nations who have openly rejected the project?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the member for the question. The province takes its obligation to consult with First Nations very seriously. The Environmental Assessment Office has been engaging with First Nations with overlapping interest to gather additional information from them relevant to the substantial start determination. Impact benefit agreements, which are government to government, are negotiated by the Ministry of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, and if the member has further questions regarding those agreements, that he would need to follow up with that ministry.
Member.
Thank you. Is PRGT allowed to continue construction after the environmental assessment certificate expired on November 25th of last year, but before the minister or a delegate makes the substantial start determination?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member. I can confirm that there has been no active construction since prior to November 25th, 2025, and it is our understanding, based on communication with the Environmental Assessment Office, that the proponent has no plans to undertake any construction prior to the substantial start decision.
Member.
Thank you to the minister. Does the government plan on having any public process on the substantial start decision, public consultation or engagement?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the member. The substantial start determination is an administrative decision. It is based on the assessment of material evidence from the project site and from project documentation, as well as relevant information from First Nations. As an administrative decision, public comment periods are not held during a substantial start determination process. However, evidence provided by non-governmental organizations and members of the public who wrote to the Environmental Assessment Office to provide additional information regarding the substantial start determination will be included in the EAO's report to the decision maker.
Member.
Thank you. I have a question about silicums. Can the minister tell me what role the ministry or environmental assessment office has in substantiating the project's asserted global climate benefits?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member. So the role of the Environmental Assessment Office is to assess the potential environmental, economic, social, cultural, and health effects of major projects proposed in British Columbia. The assessed impacts on climate can be found in the assessment report, and we're happy to offer a briefing to the member on the report.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One last question related to the EAO. The budget estimates suggest about a $270,000 increase to the EAO, about 1.6%, so roughly inflation. Given the direction in the minister's mandate letter to develop measures to expedite authorizations, can the minister tell me how the EAO can expedite without increasing their budget or presumably staff complement?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member. So currently we are completing cross-ministry work, and one of the key strategies that we are employing is to move to concurrent permitting instead of consecutive permitting, and this can reduce timelines up to a year or more.
Member.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a couple of questions about air quality. Does the ministry plan on examining the current state of regulation of outdoor air quality and the effectiveness of the existing regulations to protect British Columbians from current air quality related health risks?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. In the current fiscal year, ministry staff are evaluating the effectiveness of record-keeping requirements under the open burning smoke control regulation. In addition to the regulation, it's important to mention that the ministry has a robust monitoring and reporting system to protect British Columbians from air quality-related health risks, including a system of air quality advisories and Smoky Skies Bulletin to inform British Columbians when air quality is degraded. Ministry staff also support partners in communities and local government to identify steps that can be taken locally to improve air quality. BC has an extensive air quality monitoring network which provides real-time air quality data and the Air Quality Health Index, which can be found by Googling Air Quality Health Index online.
Member.
Thank you. Thank you to the minister, and I've used the monitoring network several times, usually in the summer during wildfire season. It is quite effective. I appreciate that the record keeping and monitoring and advisories are there, but I will just try again to find out if the ministry has any plans to update the regulations, the set advisory limits around outdoor air quality, particularly in response to wildfire smoke.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. For British Columbia, we adhere to the federal Canadian ambient air quality standards. We have no plans on developing our regulations as we adhere to the federal ones. However, while wildfire emissions are difficult to manage, the ministry and partners have a robust warning system to warn British Columbians when poor air quality is expected. The ministry works with multiple partners, including health authorities and the BC Centre for Disease Control, to ensure all British Columbians have access to air quality and health information and advice during times of high wildfire smoke. We set up temporary sites with the Ministry of Health to make sure that the temporary stations are there to be monitoring the smoke.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to parks and parks access, provincial spending for the maintenance of parks and trails has not kept up with the need for years, and despite volunteer groups organizing to assist with maintaining parks and trails, there has been a struggle to find a long-term solution. Will the Minister explain the Ministry's plan to fund and support the maintenance of our vast parks and trails so that British Columbians can continue to enjoy the beauty of our province for years to come?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the member. We know that there is a high demand for campsites, especially as more people choose to live in BC every year and continue to travel to our campsites. We are committed to strengthening our incredible parks and recreation sites, which draw visitors from across the country and around the world. That's why this government has invested over $45 million in expanding campgrounds, including campsites in the Chief Provincial Park, Golden Ears, Chilliwack Lake, Cultus Lake, and Garibaldi. There has been $21.5 $1.9 million invested over 5 years, and for the recreation site strategy, as well as $23.8 million in base capital, $1.2 million for accessibility, $7.1 million in maintenance, and $3.34 million in maintenance for rec sites and trails.
Member.
Thank you. As the minister knows, the rapid population growth in the Squamish Valley has put pressure on local parks. I appreciate that that Snoqualm's Chief and Garibaldi Park that the minister just mentioned are both in my riding and have benefited from those expansions. In the Squamish Valley, however, over tourism has threatened the peaceful enjoyment of the Squamish Nation's members' territory. I note in the estimates a commitment for a parks enhancement fund, and I appreciate the expansion and other strategies. If I understand correctly, there previously was a parks acquisition fund which has come to the end of its program life, and I'm wondering from the minister whether there's any prospect of reinitiating that. I understand there was a possibility of acquiring land in the Squamish Valley that fell through, but hoping that subject to budgetary constraints may come back. So are there any plans to resurrect that acquisition fund?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member. The member is correct. We did have a one-time uplift for park acquisitions. We do maintain $2 million in the budget for land acquisitions, but we also do continue to work with our partnership with the BC Parks Foundation and other conservation organizations, as well as other partners on future land acquisitions.
Member.
Thank you for that. That's encouraging. On a similar vein, with regard to conservation officers, I visited a remote community on the side of Lillooet Lake with a rec site nearby, and they recounted to me over the last 2 summers during, well, at least one summer with a fire ban, that there were campers with huge bonfires, and that they called the conservation officer service. The closest conservation officer was 3 hours away, and the RCMP wouldn't respond. We've had several grizzly bears come through both Whistler and Squamish, and the discussion of late has been the scarcity of conservation officers. I don't believe there are any resource management officers, if I got my terminology correct. So there are five officers between West Vancouver and north of Pemberton to Nequaqua. Are there any steps being taken to bolster the conservation officer service and increase the number of conservation officers to keep up with the demand of calls?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the member for the question. This is an important one. The Conservation Officer Service is a professional law enforcement agency, and they really do handle a lot of the human-wildlife conflicts, so we do understand the importance of having them in communities, especially in rural and remote communities such as I live in. For the conservation officer, we did increase the number of officers last year. We included 10 more officers, and we are up to 167 now. And the Conservation Officer Service, they look at several factors when they're determining where conservation officers are posted, including officer safety, call volume, zone coverage, geographic location, call demand for public safety and enforcement concerns, population size, level of industrial, commercial, and recreational activity, number of existing officers within the area, and emerging environmental trends and partnerships. So we do look at the needs within the communities, and then we do try to look for the areas that we can provide that coverage.
Member.
Thank you. I will just flip back to the question about parks acquisition. The residents in the same community made the observation that if the rec site where this where the ignoring of the fire ban was taking place were to become a park, that perhaps there would be more resources allocated to it. In addition to parks enhancement and parks acquisition, has there been any consideration given to converting any rec sites, now that they're all within the same ministry, converting any rec sites to parks?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, the member brings up an excellent point. We recently went through a reorganization, as many know, and the rec sites and trails were moved from the Ministry of Forest into the Minister of Environment and Parks. Absolutely, we are always looking for more parks and more ways to enhance campsites and to build more. We're definitely going to be looking at what are some suitable rec sites that we could contemplate, and it's something that we'll continue to look for.
Member.
Thank you, Minister. I'd like to ask a question about Indigenous protected and conserved areas. In the 2025 budget, the government reiterated their commitment to protecting 30% of BC terrestrial areas by 2030. Can the Minister give a status update on recognizing IPCAs in the province and explain how much they will contribute to the province's commitment of 30 by 30?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member. So the role of my ministry is to manage the parks once they are established. The IPCAs are a part of the Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship under the broader land use planning mandate, and suggests that you canvass the minister responsible for that.
Member.
Thank you. Still learning the lay of the land. So, just have a question about circular economy and solid waste. Since I've done some work in this area, I note the per capita solid waste disposal targets are fairly modest. But my question around that is, it's my understanding that there's some federal regulations around single-use plastics. If those were to change, can the minister comment on whether BC would stay the course on single-use plastic regulation and minimization?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. At this point, we have no intention of reversing our course on single-use plastics, and we want to continue to support the circular economy.
Member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Be about 12 years ago, I was involved with extended producer responsibility related to packaging, multi-material BC at the time. The reason I was engaged in that and interested in it was with the possibility of increasing EPR fees for hard to recycle materials. Last I heard, and I'm a little bit out of date, that process hasn't necessarily taken place. I'm wondering where the ministry is on really moving towards punitive EPR fees for packaging, and yeah, mostly packaging that is more damaging to the environment, harder to recycle, and more hazardous in landfills.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the EPR 5-year action plan outlined the pathway to identifying a policy approach to address non-residential packaging in 2025 and beyond. Our ministry released a discussion paper on non-residential packaging and engaged on the topic between April and July of 2024. An engagement summary was recently published on March 25th, 2025. So we're currently identifying and prioritizing the policy approaches and considering the feedback that we received from the engagement.
Member.
Thank you. In my last couple minutes, I've got one or two more questions on, I'll flip back to PRGT. I think I have time. The Minister probably knows there is some evidence suggesting that BC LNG is facing a global market in decline and already facing a glut of LNG supply. Given the risk that some of these projects, or specifically, PRGT sea systems become economically non-viable and present the risk of stranded assets, does the province have a mechanism to absorb liability and risk from the Nisga'a Nation or other nations who have been promised economic benefits from these projects?
At this time, I'm going to call the committee on recess for 5 minutes. I ask that everybody be back in their seats in 5 minutes' time, please. Applies Section A, Ministry of Environment and Parks. Back to order. We are currently considering the budget estimates of the Ministry of Environment and Parks. I now recognize the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for the question. So this question, it would fall under the Ministry of Energy and Climate Solutions. So I would say that the member should canvass that ministry.
Member.
Thank you. Through the chair to the minister, can it possibly be in the public interest to let PRGT be built after so much delay without an updated assessment of the impacts of the project on all the communities along the route and with no approved terminus?
Recognizing the Minister of Environment and Parks.
Thank you, and welcome, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the member. So the environmental assessment certificate was granted after years-long comprehensive environmental assessment, and it took into consideration all of the mitigating measures. The substantial start determination, it's an administrative decision. It is based on the assessment of material evidence from the project site and from project documentation, as well as relevant information from First Nations. In addition, the EAO also is currently carrying out assessments of 2 amendment applications where changes to the project are proposed.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last question, I'll just flip back to extended producer responsibility. I've seen firsthand in a number of smaller communities the kind of tragic consequences of our consumer society, and that is mattresses in landfills. So with apologies for not having examined the action plan, I'm just wondering if minister or staff can tell me if there's a deadline there for bringing mattresses under an EPR program and seeing them properly recycled.
Members, I request that individuals who have their devices on, that they mute them so that there isn't additional noise in the background. Thank you. Recognizing the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the member. So the action plan outlines the Minister of Environment and BC Parks proposal to expand the recycling regulation to include such things as mattresses. At this time, the ministry and the government were still considering how to proceed or when to proceed with that.
Recognizing the leader of the third party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the minister and to staff for thoughtful answers. That concludes